Welcome to the Sparks and Space podcast. I am your host, Ailish Lucas, and each week I'll be bringing sparks of inspiration to ignite into your business and the space to remind you who you truly are. I'm so excited you're here. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I am so excited because we have the absolutely incredible Zoe Blaskey, who is the founder of Motherkind, which is a self-empowerment platform for modern mums. Through Motherkind, Zoe coaches mothers of all backgrounds, from global CEOs to full-time mums, on how to navigate the huge challenges of modern motherhood. She's also a business owner, and she hosts the Motherkind podcast, which is the UK's #1 family podcast on iTunes, and speaks every week to world-leading experts on a range of topics from self-care to mental health, career, nutrition, and parenting. And The Telegraph celebrated the podcast as the antidote to the toxic perfectionism of modern motherhood. Now, this is the reason I'm so excited to speak to Zoe, because she has such a wealth of knowledge and she has such a refreshing angle on motherhood and business, which is why I was so pleased that she said yes to come and have a chat with me over on this week's episode. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Zoe, oh my goodness, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I am so excited to be able to get some time to chat to you and to hear about your pearls of wisdom and having a really successful business and a really successful podcast, being a life coach and a transformation coach, and having that business and being a parent, but then also doing it yourself and living it yourself. So I think it's going to be a really good chat. So thank you so much again.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm excited.
So what first got you into deciding that you wanted to start to specialize in particular with parenting and motherkind?
So I had done a little bit of coach training, and I was always really interested in transformation, like fascinated. Like, how do you take whatever might have happened into your life and break free of that? I was so fascinated by people who had these sort of breakout success stories, and not necessarily success in terms of money, but more success in terms of transforming how they felt about themselves. I was always really interested in that, fascinated by it. I was always reading and studying, and then I became a mother, and I thought, because I had this sort of basis of I'd been in lots of recovery and therapy myself, I thought that I would find it hard but fine, and that wasn't my experience at all. I found it really hard, but I didn't find it hard necessarily with the parenting element of it. What I found really hard was the shift in me. I felt like I was like, who am I now? And what's happened to my relationship? And why do I suddenly hate my husband that I used to love? And why do I feel like my old work that I was doing just doesn't feel relevant anymore? I felt like everything got thrown up in the air. And I also noticed that a lot of my old coping behaviors, as I called them, so trying to control and micromanage everything, trying to make everything perfect, really beating myself up, all of that came really loud in those early years of motherhood. So I started, just for my own work, really, I started doing loads of research, not in parenting books, which I didn't find that helpful. I found them too prescriptive. I found them completely ignoring me as the mother. So I started to dive in and understand this word matrescence, which is the becoming of a mother. I started to understand about how our children will reactivate in us what was happening to us at the same age. I started to understand about how generational patterning works. So I just got absolutely fascinated. And I was telling a friend about it one day, and she was like, you need to tell more people about this. This is mind-blowing. Because I also was putting into practice everything I was learning and was feeling in some ways better than ever. And the resistance was quite high, as it often is, I think, when you start to tap into what might be your path or purpose. There's always a ton of resistance in my experience. But ultimately I started the podcast, and then very quickly people started asking me to coach them, and I'd already done some coach training, so I felt really comfortable in that. But I went and did a couple more qualifications, and then I started coaching and growing the podcast, and that was 5 years ago.
Oh my goodness, and what a journey it's been. And I love the fact that you brought up your journey along that. And I don't know if you've heard of a book. This is completely off completely off the questions that I wanted to ask, but there's a book called Made into Mother by Sarah Durham Wilson. And I've recently read that, and I just felt like it's been so mind-blowing, because what you mentioned there, now it might not, this is only my personal experience, but what you mentioned there just seems so going from that maiden to mother archetype, as it were, and everybody moving into it, but with us not having those rites of passage or those rituals that previously, back in the day, many moons ago, would actually happen. And you look back at this old life that maybe you had either before a baby or before you become a stepmom, or before you become that parent. And I sometimes, from a personal experience, I look back and I'm almost like in a grieving process about it, where I'm like, oh, but that's the maiden kind of archetype, is where society celebrates it. And yet when you're in that mother archetype, which doesn't in the book, Sarah talks about how it doesn't actually have to be where you give birth to somebody. It can be like an age range of about 35 to 55, where you move into something where your old life just doesn't feel right, or you're birthing a new business. And yet this is where we need those rites of passage just to move into our summer of our lives. And I think it's so interesting, particularly in the book, and then with what you were mentioning around how when we do move into this new area and arena of our life, society still focuses on like how you were when you were younger, rather than now, which is like enjoying it and actually being here to do your legacy work and being here to make an impact. So it almost feels a little bit, when I listen to that, like that's kind of what you went through as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you're so right. You know, society's focus is all about bouncing back. Can you bounce back? And that phrase is actually huge. And, you know, not so much now, it is changing, but, you know, it was only a couple of years ago where that would be hugely celebrated. You know, there'd be a picture of someone saying, can you believe her baby's 3 months and she's back in her jeans? That was really celebrated. And I think that's where so much tension comes for mothers, because they have this idea that they want to get their old selves back. And I always say with motherhood, you're not your old self anymore. That part is, and that's where I think sometimes the grieving comes in, is that part, you're into a new phase now, and it's about how you can move forward with that. But so many people grieve, and I did, you know, that loss of freedom, that loss of, your time is not your own when you're a mother. Your time is just not your own. You're responsible to other people now. And even when you're on your own, your time is still not your own, because, you know, at any minute the school could call me and I would need to finish this. And so it's a completely different, everything changes. And that's really what I'm passionate about supporting mothers with, is how do we move into this phase in a really empowered way? Because I think we have to fight against so many societal messages and within ourselves, you know, around feeling what we should be doing and feeling guilty all the time about what we're doing or not doing. This intensity around, you know, having ambition and motherhood. And I feel like we know more than we've ever known about the importance of childhood, particularly the first 5 years. And obviously Kate Middleton is doing her Shaping Us campaign, and that really creates this huge melting pot of just pressure and confusion. And that's really where Motherkind comes in, to bring that clarity and to bring, just as what you were saying, like these really reassuring ideas. You're meant to find it really hard. That's what matrescence is about. Like, it's meant to be really bumpy, just like adolescence is meant to be really bumpy, and your hormones are all over the place and you're like, what's going on? Who am I? That's what rites of passage feel like. They're never smooth. rarely in my experience. So I think just normalizing that completely bumpy, questioning ride into motherhood is really powerful.
I love that so much. It leads greatly into the next question, actually, just because we always we get sold this image that motherhood should be this most joyful, happy, alive time of our lives, and yet the experience is actually quite the opposite. So how do people start to change that script to bring that invitation of this new identity into themselves?
Yeah, I think the first thing is understanding what we were just talking about. So understanding that word matrescence, and that becoming a mother is a really hard transition. It's really hard. And I think just normalizing that and saying to yourself, this is hard, not because I'm doing anything wrong, not because I haven't read the right book or even listened to the right podcast. It's just really hard. So I think normalizing that is, and labeling that, ironically, is one of the quickest ways to accepting it, and then to having far more kindness and compassion. I also think that when I talk about an empowered mother, I think people tend to think about a sort of suited up mother, with a baby and a bottle. That isn't what I mean at all. I mean someone who's really confident in her choices, because we are also the first generation of mothers raising our children in the content era. So, with podcasts like mine, with, hundreds of parenting books, that just wasn't around when our mothers were raising us. So it's really important to think about what feels right for my family, what feels right for me as a mother, and then having confidence in that choice. That's what empowerment is. That's what it is. And a lot of mothers that I work with and speak to almost every day, they've never had that. They've always had this sense of, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not enough. So they work harder and harder and harder. And then ultimately they get to that point of burnout, because they're trying in every area of their lives to do what they think they quote unquote should be doing. So that's what I talk about, is that it's such an amazing moment to question everything that you've known. Really, what is important to me now? What sort of work do I want to do if you've got the privilege of being able to choose? What feels right to me about how I live and where we live, and what are my values? And does that piece of information that I've just read, does that sit with me? Am I going to beat myself up because I'm not doing that? Or am I just going to accept that doesn't feel right for me and leave it to one side? And when we become more and more confident in our choices, it impacts our parenting, because it's really hard to put into practice any of the parenting strategies that we might read about if we ourselves feel lacking in confidence, if we feel dysregulated. So that old message, I think the old message of martyrdom in motherhood, right, which is you have to love every moment, and it's not about you anymore, it's about the baby. Like, all the new science on that really flips it on its head, which is that actually, if you can get yourself in a place where you do feel confident, where you feel not burnt out, where you're giving to yourself a little bit, so you've got energy and you feel good, and you can work with your inner critic, so you're not constantly beating yourself up, then you can actually put into place, however you want to parent. It's hundreds of times easier. So I really feel like that sort of martyr motherhood of the 70s and 80s is, Motherkind is part of that, part of transforming that, to really think about, no, the most powerful thing we can do actually is to make sure that we feel truly, truly happy, truly empowered, truly confident. And that doesn't mean all the time. It's not like something that we beat ourselves up again if we don't hit. It's that we take that moment of reflection and ask ourselves, those really powerful questions, like, does this work for me? What might my work be like now? Have I always felt not good enough? What could I do to change that?
I think that's so important. And it's interesting though, because I feel like when you are in that transition over to motherhood, there's that destabilizing that happens. So it's almost like you read all the books, you get all the advice, but you don't know who you are in a sense, and you don't have that confidence. So that's where you're like, does this sit with me? And I'm like, I don't know, does it? I feel like then the only way to be able to break through that is almost to drop into your body and listen to the wisdom there, which I feel like a lot of us are so used to living in our heads and living in our minds and it whirring round and round. And yeah, if we can drop into our bodies, then it has all that wisdom there for us to be able to bring that confidence back. Do you do any work with like embodiment?
Yeah, absolutely. And experimenting. Like, I think that's how you figure anything out, right? Is that you try something, you try working full time, and you're like, no, I really want to work full time, and that feels really important to me. And you might do a couple of years in that and go, I'm burning out. Like, this is not working for me. How am I going to figure this out? Or you might do the other extreme. You might say, I'm not going to work. If you've got the privilege to do that, I'm not going to work. And that might feel, it's this constant checking in. Like, how does this feel to me? How does this feel to me? Is this working for me? Is this working for me? And I think that's how you figure out what feels right for you. Like, I tried to sleep train Jessie, who's now 7, and it felt horrific. Like, I had a visceral reaction. I was like, this isn't right for me, but I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't tried it. So I think it's that constant experimentation, which we do in other areas of our lives, right? We do all the time. And I think it's having that ability to release some of those shackles that so many mothers have of, this is how I should be doing it, this is what it should look like. And the moment we start to feel guilty, that's a real blocker to being able to just have a bit more freedom with how we handle this lifelong relationship, which is ultimately what parenting is, isn't it? It's a lifelong relationship, hopefully, that you're cultivating. So yeah, it's definitely the way to figure out that confidence is to experiment with what feels right. And to keep checking in, which is why I talk nonstop about journaling for mothers, because it's just the quickest, most powerful way that I found to scribble down like what feels right, what feels off, what needs to change. And if we don't do that, I think years go by and it's just so easy because you're so busy, right? This is just so busy. Every minute of my day is full. So I just have to make sure that 5 of those minutes are for a little bit of self-reflection so that I can course correct. I really don't want to end up in like 20 years and go, oh God, I was burnt out and stressed and guilty the whole time. Don't want that.
Yeah, I love journaling. I think it's like one of those transformational things that if you can just sit there and get all of the shizzle out onto a piece of paper. And because I always remember, I think it was actually Tony Robbins who said this, where when you're in your head, you're dead. And I resonate with that in the sense of when you're in your head and you're just always there, then it becomes really overwhelming. Whereas if you can get it out onto paper and go, oh, okay, here we go, then it's so powerful. And also, I know that I think that you've interviewed Dr. Sophie Mort. Yeah, and she used to be my therapist, and she's just absolutely incredible. And she always said to me, recommended me also doing rage journaling. And where, if anybody's listening and they've not heard of it, it's like getting a piece of paper that you can burn or you can rip up so nobody sees it, and just letting it rip on this piece of paper, because there are lots of things that come up, whether you're in business, whether you're in like motherhood, or whether there's or friendships or relationships or anything where it like winds you up. If you can get that out onto a piece of paper, then it just helps to like relieve the anger a lot more, and just helps with life a lot better. And also if you then read it, so it disassociates from like the anger a little bit more on what you've written, and you have a little giggle about how horrible you are, and then you let it go.
Yeah, anger pages are really, really good, especially in early motherhood, because what so many people find is that they have this burning anger and resentment often to their partner if that's their setup at home. So yeah, anger pages are really, really powerful way to get it out. So screaming into a pillow. So it's anything that you can do to just move that emotion through you is really powerful, because for sure, like that resentment in early motherhood seems to me quite a universal experience.
So interesting. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on business and motherhood. So how have you found growing the business while also raising your two little girls, and then ensuring you're also feeling like happy, alive and joyful, because you have to like you have to walk the talk in a way, don't you now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't always feel those things, of course. but I think a couple of things. I've really intentionally kept the business smaller than it could be, really intentionally, because while the girls were little, I only wanted to use so much childcare. So that has meant saying no to a lot of opportunities, a lot of really big opportunities that could have grown the platform really quickly. And I've said no to those because one of my values is that I'm present with my family. So with any tension point, there's a really hard choice to make. And that's just hard choices that I've made. I also think it's really important to normalize the sacrifice. So I work in the evenings, not every evening, but I definitely work in the evenings because I finish work at 3:30 every day to do the pickup and the D and the bed and the bath. And then sometimes I have to start again at 8:30. It's definitely impacted my social life because I then work from sort of 8:30 to 9:30 and then I go to sleep to make sure that I'm energized enough for the next day. So I think it's really important that we normalize that you cannot have a banging social life, a business, and be a present parent. If someone can find the way to figure that out, then they need to tell me. I don't think there is enough hours, and whatever choice you make, there's always a payoff. So I've chosen to grow Motherkind in the way that I have, far more slowly than I think it could have done. But I feel really proud that I've kept it going. It has grown, and I've been really present with the girls as I've been doing that. So yeah, I think it's really important to normalize those payoffs, because I think it's super easy for someone to look at my social media or whatever and think that I'm, behind the scenes just smashing it in every area. It's not. It's about intentional choice and being okay with the grief that comes up of letting some things go.
I think that's so honest that you, first of all, have talked about the grief of letting things go, but then also the choices that you've made with turning down massive opportunities. Because I feel like, particularly with a business, and when you have that ambition and you're like, this massive opportunity's come up, do I do it or do I not? Because I know that this is almost like another baby that you've got here with like the business and your legacy work that you want to do, and what you're here to make an impact and a positive impact in the world. And yet you've also got your children, and it's hard choices. I get, correct me if I'm wrong here. Is it hard choices, but it's also easy because you're like, I'm very clear on my values and I'm very clear about what I want to do. So whilst it's hard to turn that down, it's also easy because my focus is my children.
Is it easy? No, it's never easy. It's never easy when a big opportunity comes in. Do you want to go and, do this live podcast or present this thing? And I turn it down because I want to be with the girls that weekend. It never feels easy. It always feels like, oh, I really want to do that. I really want to do it. And then there'll be some grappling, like, could I do that? Could I do that? That would mean I'd be away 3 nights. Is that really what I want to do? And then normally 9 times out of 10, I will turn that down. So no, I don't think it never feels easy, but I think it always feels intentional. And I think I've seen so many mothers burn out, and a lot of them I coach. So that gives me a really nice insight as well from my clients, as I really see the cost of that. I'm also really lucky in that I'm able to grow my business from a financial perspective on my terms. I don't have investors, I don't have a team of 10. I don't have a massive wage bill every month. I don't have really high fixed costs. So that gives me loads of privilege around the flexibility with which I'm able to run the business. If you're running a business where many of my clients are, where you've got a team of 100 and you have, £1 million wage bill every month. It's a completely different ball game. But I was really intentional with how I wanted to set up and run Motherkind, because I never wanted to get into that situation where I just felt like the business was running me, as opposed to, you know, me running it. And it, you know, it's definitely a lifestyle business for me. I make Motherkind fit into my lifestyle, not the other way. And that's a privilege, you know, not everyone has that choice. I completely understand that. But yeah, that's what it's been like for me.
So in step parenting, as some people will know on the podcast, I am a full-time step parent to an amazing 6-year-old. What advice would you have for the stepmother who is traditionally made out by society to be that wicked stepmother? And the reason I ask this, not only because I am within that role, but also because I feel like, I was talking to a friend about this a while ago, when you come into being a mother, as in a biological mother, there's a celebration of it. And when you come into being a step parent, it's like how's it going? And there's no celebration whatsoever. And then you have society being like, oh, it's traditionally like the wicked stepmothers here. And all social science has now shown that the amount of support for stepmothers is significantly less than what biological mothers will have. So have you ever worked with step parents before? And what's your advice for them? And what would be some really great tips?
Yeah, I have. Definitely. I've worked with every type of setup that you can imagine. I think the first thing I would say is around language. So lots of people now are changing that language, and they're choosing what to call themselves that works for them and their family, so that they don't bring, because words create worlds, right? Words are really powerful. And you're right, there is that negative association around that word stepmother, because of, you know, going all back, you know, to the Grimm fairy tales. And so the first thing I would say is think about a word that works for you, and you can call yourself whatever you like. That could be a really fun thing to do with your, you know, the children in your life. Like, what should we call me? Like, do you want to call, you know, and that's the first thing that I would say, is that to release that negative association, think about those words. I would also think about this idea that it's really a relationship that you're building in the way that you would build any relationship in your life. So that's thinking about, you know, what do you really enjoy? What do those children really enjoy? How can you create that together? How can you get to know each other better? It's almost like a dating period, isn't it? When you first start to meet those children, it's like exactly the same as when you're getting to know someone. And I think it's really just leaning into how that child is and being led by them. Like, some children, you know, are sort of arms open and, you know, come to me, and some children are completely the opposite of that. And I think honoring that is really important. And, you know, I've had some incredible parenting experts on the podcast over the years, and they're all consistent with this one thing, which is to validate and name the hard thing in the room, not to try and gloss over it. So you find it, I can see you find it really hard that I'm here today. I get that. It must be really confusing for you. Is completely different to, you know, well, I'm here, and, you know, the good thing that I'm here is this, and do you want a biscuit? And I can make, you know, trying to gloss over everything and make it jolly and make it good. It's really counterintuitive. But the real power, I think, is leaning into those more difficult conversations and really validating that, because that's what makes children feel safe. And when children feel safe emotionally and physically, of course, then they're able to connect. Like, safety always comes before connection. And one way that children feel safe is that they feel really seen. So someone can see that it's like, you're having a hard day with this. What's going on? Do you want to talk about it or not? And the moment, I see this in my own girls so many times, the moment you just name that internal confusion for them, it's like night and day. It's like night and day, because they feel seen, and then they feel safe, and then they can connect. So I think that's really, if I was ever to become a a bonus parent, whatever you want to call it, that's really where I'd be starting. I'd be thinking about that. How can I make this child feel really seen by me wherever they're at?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I have also noticed that when I sit with James and if he's going through something and I say, oh, that's really hard, like I can see you're upset by that. That's okay to be upset. Would you like to talk about it more, or like would you like to do this? And it's the upset or the anger dissipates, and then it opens up for that connection, like you said.
Exactly. Whereas often, because of when we were parented, that wasn't the way that parenting was done, really. So if you had that experience, that was quite rare. So often our wiring, I call it, or our programming, is to want to say, don't cry, there's nothing to cry about, because we can feel so uncomfortable around that. Whereas actually the new science tells us the quickest way to move children through that, it's so counterintuitive, is to lean right into it, and to name it, and to let them be sad, and to let them have that roller coaster, for sure, and to create pockets, like sounds like you're doing amazing with James, where you can have some of those connection moments, some of those honest conversations. Like it's often when I'm doing a jigsaw with Jessie, who's 7, and we're sat quietly, her little sister might be off doing something else, that she'll tell me what's going on, just in those little quiet moments where you're doing something else, but there's just a moment that they'll reveal what's going on in their inner world to you. I think creating just 10 minutes a day, if I was going to become I like that phrase, bonus parent. It's a bit American, but I really like it.
Me too.
If I was gonna, that's what I'd be doing as well. I'd really be trying to create those little moments, just to let some of that what might be going on in the inside come out.
Yeah, I've always found that if I'm like making the bed and then James is just kind of hanging around, and then we'll have like a little chat, and then so much will come out.
Yeah.
And then when I come back down and tell Nick, or like mention something to him, he's like, oh right, wow, I didn't know that. And I guess it's a little kick for me, because I know that I've then created a connection there, and that's really, really lovely. But also it's like they're also really cherished, because you can build that relationship with your bonus son and be able to, like you said, just build that lifelong relationship and be intentional about knowing that it's going to be over a long period of time, and if you can have a really positive effect even if you're not a biological parent. So
of course you can, absolutely. Like I think, if my girls were to ever have that, life is not perfect, and lots of families have other parents that they sort of don't align with from a value perspective, but I can imagine if it did, it's an incredible thing. Like I have a stepmother who I got when I was 20. I was older, 26, but it's incredible. Like I really like having another energy, another grandma for my girls is amazing. They have 3 grandmas. They tell everyone how lucky they are. They have 3 grandmas. I think, it's often about perspective and language, and also about the person. Like I think it can be really hard when you blend families and there are a clash of values, and that's when boundaries come in, and that's a different conversation. But it sounds like you're creating real safety and connection with James, for him to be able to share what's going on with you, which is just beautiful. Like that's all children need. Truly, I believe that. Like when I speak to Dr. Nicola Perrell, a holistic psychologist, who's incredible, talking about what happens to us in our early childhood and how that can then manifest into behaviors that we might not want to see when we're older. She says constantly, she just keeps, all children need is to be seen, heard and validated. And it sounds so simple, and it's not. Because amongst our busy, crazy lives, and it's really not easy, but it's simple to say. And I think that's really where to start.
Yeah, I love that. And also I think it's simple to say, which is good for just remembering it when you're in those moments of like, oh my God.
yeah, it's magic. Like this morning, like Rose, we're late for school, and she just didn't want to get dressed. She didn't want to get dressed. Everything in me wanted to be like, put your effing jumper on. Jessie's crying because she's like, I'm going to be late. She hates being late. There's like all this intensity in the house. And so the first thing I always do is regulate myself. Always. So I was like, just took a breath. And I was like, Zoe, it doesn't matter if you're late. Like, you're not, do you know what I mean? You're not running for president here. Like, it's cool. Like, it doesn't matter if you're late. Doesn't matter. So I regulate myself, took some breath. And I just said to Rose, you really don't want to get dressed this morning, do you? She was like, no. And I was like, but we have to. Should we get dressed? She was like, yeah. And she got dressed. Like, the moment I just validated her reality, she softened, and I was able to. Whereas if I'd have, on a not so good morning, which happens too, like try to wrestle the jumper on and just get dressed, like it just doesn't work. It's just not as effective. And then of course I'd have to be dishing out punishments. And so I think just that little validation piece is so powerful. And for ourselves, saying to ourselves, God, you really don't want to be a stepmother today. This is really hard. This is really intense. Like, labeling that for ourselves has the same effect. Like, it softens us and makes us more able to connect. So I think naming things as they are is such a simple, in some ways, and really powerful tool.
I love that. And I'm smiling so much when you're saying all of this, just because I can resonate with it, but also it's so true, because when you can almost see yourself, hear yourself and validate yourself, then you become softer in your own body as well, to then be able to have your own breakthrough. Whereas if then, say, you're beating yourself up over something and being really harsh with yourself and being like, oh, why can't I do this? Or like the guilt comes in, then you have this blocker there. Whereas when I'm a great fan of Dr. Kristin Neff, who focuses on like self-kindness and compassion. And I think that when you can be kind with yourself and just have a chat with yourself and regulate yourself, as you mentioned, it creates your own breakthroughs, doesn't it?
Yeah, because when you're in that place of like resistance, that's what creates stress. So resistance creates stress. So the moment you accept it, and people get confused with acceptance, they think it's like, oh, so it's cool that my kid doesn't want to do this. Oh, it's cool that my husband doesn't do this. It's like, no, that's not what acceptance is. Acceptance isn't that you just let things carry on as they are. Acceptance is the first step to any change, right? So you get rid of that resistance. Wish it wasn't like this. Why is he like that? Why doesn't he help me more? And you go, okay, what am I facing here? I've got a partner who doesn't want to do this. Okay. It's like you accept the reality. And the moment you do that, you're then able to make changes. When you're in that resistance place, it's like you can't change. I often use this analogy with a bus with this, which just really helped me when I was thinking about this. It's like if you got on the wrong bus and you just were sailing down the road on the wrong bus and you're going, I'm on the wrong bus. I don't want this to be the bus. I don't want this to be the bus. This is the wrong bus. You wouldn't change anything. You'd just create loads of stress. Because then you go, I'm on the wrong bus. I need to stop this and that's when you can then get off and go the other way. And that's what acceptance is to me. So I think you're absolutely right. It's that resistance that we do where we don't want to accept it. And sometimes that can be like hours, sometimes it can be decades of like, I don't want it to be this way. I have it a lot with my clients where they'll be thinking about their own parents and they're like, but I don't want my mum not to be someone who can support me. And it can take decades to get to that acceptance. Like, I have a mother who can't support me in my parenting choices, or who can't support me in my career, or who doesn't feel happy for me when I, make this move or do this move. Like, that acceptance can bring loads of grief as well on a big level. Yeah. So again, like, you're so right. Those micro acceptances and those macro acceptances, are important.
Yeah, they massively are. Now, I know you mentioned the holistic psychologist there just before, and her really amazing advice that she gave you. And I know on the podcast you've interviewed such an incredible array of experts within the area of parenting and also like outside of it as well, with like in psychology too. What are some of the best pieces of advice that you've that kind of stick in your mind where you're like, oh yes, I have to remember that forevermore and tell people about it?
I don't know if it's advice as such, because I think advice is tricky, because I think it's really hard to listen to advice if you're not, I think advice is tricky. But I think what's really helpful is concepts. And there's been 3 concepts that I would say have been world changing for me. And that first one is matrescence, like understanding, because I'd never heard of it. I was like, what? Understanding, as you were talking about, that maiden to mother transition, which the term is matrescence. It's like adolescence, of when someone goes from a teen to an adult. Understanding that concept completely changed how I viewed that first year of motherhood. I was like, oh, there was nothing wrong with me. I was going through my matrescence. It's meant to be bumpy. It's meant to be really hard, just as I was talking about before. So for sure, that concept really, really, really helped me. I think the second one you already mentioned. So I've had Kristen Neff on a couple of times and really dived into her work. And I think understanding self-compassion and how it's the opposite of easy and soft, how actually it's sometimes the hardest thing that you can do, and how self-compassion actually makes you more productive and makes you more able to experiment, like we were talking about before, and change things in your life. Like understanding how to get that critic and that perfectionism like binding me, and those shoulds and that guilt, like understanding how to release all of that has been mind-blowing to me. I didn't know any of that before. And I think the third one, there are so many, but the third one I think that was life-changing for me was understanding that my children, whatever age they were at, will bring up what I was feeling at that same age. Because I think understanding that really helped me to understand my own experience with my children. Like, why is this so annoying to me? I would use the word triggering or annoying, or what is it? Oh, okay. So that part in me, like my kids are really loud. And I used to be really, really loud. And that got shut down in me, not by my parents actually, but by my peers. And so I can find it really, really, really hard when my kids are just fully in themselves, like fully expressing themselves. And what I learning about that the reason I find that so hard is because that very thing was shut down in me. It's just mind-blowing, because I'm like, okay, they can just do what they're doing. Let them be them. I'm not going to shut them down and repeat that cycle for another generation. I'm going to start to unlock the part of me that was silenced. Like, why was I silenced? And what was the impact on me? So then I'm able to do a bit of my own, like, I'm not talking about hours, like 10 minutes, like journaling, like, oh, okay, I was really silenced and I used to be really loud and confident, and that's been knocked out of me. And how can I get that back? And so I think understanding that has been completely changed who I am. It's completely healed like some of my core things that I would struggle with in my life. And it's completely changed my parenting, because I don't have that visceral need to shut down parts of my children because they're activating me. So I think those 3 ideas, matrescence, self-compassion, and that generational like mirroring, and that my children bring up what I felt at the same age, completely life-changing. I didn't know any of it before. That's the thing. It's like, how did I not know any of this? I did loads of reading before I became a mother. I was just reading the wrong stuff. I was reading like What to Expect When You're Expecting and Gina Ford, and none of that helped me. But those 3 things, yeah, really life-changing.
I think the last concept that you mentioned there about the mirroring of the age, that's completely new to me. I've never heard that before. Can you just say a little bit more about it? Because I know you've mentioned that what, depending on the age that they're at, is similar to maybe what happened to you, and what you find really annoying / triggering in them would be potentially what happened in you. Like, yeah. How do you even recognize that? Because first of all, I've got a really bad memory, so I'm like, I have no clue what happened at age 6.
Yeah, you don't have to remember it in your head. Your body will be there. You don't have to necessarily remember it. as in, oh yeah, when I was 6, that girl in the playground said that to me and that's getting triggered now. No, it's not like that so much. It's more of visceral, like you were talking about getting out of your head and into your body. It's more of that, like if you're feeling constantly tightened or angry or like completely activated around a behavior that your child is doing, that would be something to look at. It might not be, but it would be definitely something to think about. Okay, what is it about that behavior? And there are 3 people to dive into if anyone's listening is really interested in this. So Dr. Shafali wrote the book about 20 years ago called The Conscious Parent, which really started to unlock this idea. So that's a really good place to start. Philippa Perry's book, the one that did really well with the orange cover, it was like a bestseller for years. The book you wish your parents had read, that really dives into this concept. And actually, it was her who really helped me to integrate that idea. And then the third one is Dr. Becky, who has a book called Good Inside, and she talks about it with an internal family system lens. So she talks about we all have a protector part. So that protector part is the part that would keep us small if we thought we were going to get punished for being too loud. And it's that same protector part that wants to shut down our children when they get too loud. So it's not bad what we're doing, it's not wrong, it's just that we're trying to protect ourselves and therefore our children, because maybe that wasn't allowed in ourselves. So she says brilliantly, she says, my children were my greatest inspiration and greatest teacher for learning how to set boundaries, because they are like incredible at it. And she's like, my children would scream no at me and I would get so activated, and I realized it's because I wasn't saying no enough. Like I didn't know how to do that. So she's like, instead of shutting that down in them, I built it up in me. So those are 3 people to really dive into, and just go onto the Motherkind podcast, and there's deep dives in all those subjects with each of those 3 people. But they're really, I would say those 3 are leading the way, certainly on a mass level. There'll be loads of people doing it, on smaller levels, but the people with books and courses and things that you can dive into on that would be those 3.
It's so funny you talk about boundaries, because I remember a little while ago I walked into James's playroom and he was like, I would like some alone time now. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Yes, you can absolutely have it. And I was like, what a boundary. That is incredible. And I loved it so much, because traditionally I probably in like past life wouldn't have boundaries, or was never taught to have boundaries, and if I tried to enforce a boundary it would be shut down in me. So I was just like, it was so celebrated, and I love that they can be that mirror and make you just kind of more alive to yourself and just celebrating it, I guess, but then being your teachers as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, 20 years ago, Dr. Shafali sort of was the first, I think, on a mass level to talk about this idea that actually our children are just as much here to teach us as we're here to teach them. And I think before that, the paradigm was far more about, the parent is here to teach everything, and to these people that come to us empty vessels, right? And now I think the idea far more is that actually, what if our children sort of come to us as themselves? Of course we have to teach them stuff like food, but this is on like a spirit, on a more spiritual level. Like, what if they come to us already knowing who they are, like already being who they are, and our job is just to sort of usher that in a bit, to help them become more and more and more of themselves, as opposed to like shape them and mold them into who we want to be. And I think both are hard actually, but for me, I find it easier to try and bring out in my children who I think they are. Like Jessie, my 7-year-old, is very quiet, very introverted, just wants to read, wants to do a lot of stuff on her own, and I've really tried to help her with that, like bring that out in her. Like I talk about how beautiful it is that she wants time alone, and I've also tried to help her understand introversion and what that means. And whereas Rose, my 3-year-old, is completely the opposite. And so I've tried to sort of bring that out in her, as opposed to trying to fix Jessie and say, no, you have to have play dates every night and you have to be more social. And it's like, why? That's not who she is. I'm just going to shame her then for the parts of her that arguably are her most powerful parts. So yeah, I think it's a really cool way. It's a really cool way to start to think about it differently. And the podcast is just full of episodes that will, on any of the subjects that you and I have talked about, that there'll be a podcast on it, and it'll be with a world leading expert, typically, where someone can dive into it.
Now, I know I'm aware of time and I don't want to run too much over, so I've just got 2 more questions for you. One of the things that was revolutionary for me last year was giving myself the permission to go away and take time out from being with my partner and in that stepmother role. And it was almost the story of that I told myself that I couldn't do that that was almost the blocker for me in the first place. So how have you broken through some of your own rules that you've placed on yourself to give yourself the time and space to then be the best version of you and be the best mom that you can be?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think so many of us are living with these internalized ideas of what a quote unquote good mother does. And that comes from books, it comes from society, it might come from our own. If you never saw your mum go off for 3 days, that will feel like new territory. So yeah, I too take loads of time out. I mean, loads. I take time out because I think it's amazing for Guy, my husband, to have the weekend with the kids without me. I think that's really good for them. And it's really good for me because I get to recharge, and continually keeping myself full up is how I am able to just be more of who I want to be. But I think whenever you try to do something different, you will bump up against, in coaching we call them limiting beliefs, you called them stories, you can call them whatever you want, you'll bump up against those. And that's really powerful to go, okay, what's the story that I'm telling myself about what a quote unquote good stepmother does? Okay, well, she's always there and she's never angry, and it's like, where did these stories come from? Because that sounds like a robot. That sounds like an impossible list that I am trying to measure myself against. And actually, when I do this with mothers, it's mind-blowing, like what comes up on that list. Like, I never take time away from my children. I'm always happy to see them. I never snap at them. I'm always time for my partner, time for my friends. I'm always making fresh meals. Like, the list sometimes will be like 100+ things that they're expecting of themselves. And that is how we get to burnout really quickly. So it's important to sort of unearth what are those unsaid, unwritten rules that I'm binding myself to, and do those work for me? And what might be new ways that I want to do this? But it's hard because we internalize these from really young, and then we've had lots of films and literature and stories that we've been read, and all of those are going into our brain, which when we're younger is like a sponge. So if we don't challenge those beliefs, we operate from them. So yeah, it's really, really powerful point, and it's a really important thing to do, is to think, okay, what are these beliefs that I'm running, and do they work for me, and how can I change them? But also knowing that when you start to change them, you'll get loads of resistance. I imagine when you were packing your bags, there was loads of resistance there, and I imagine driving away there might have been a bit of guilt there, or maybe elation, I don't know. But normally for me it's elation or something. It
was elation. I was like, I'm free.
Yeah. But at the point where, for me, it's often at the point where I'm like communicating it to Guy or the girls. I'm like, this feels like a stretch, because it's advocating for ourselves. And often we didn't get taught how to do that. So yeah, and if any change is going to feel hard. And I think, again, it's really important to normalize that, because the self-help industry doesn't. They're like, you can change anything and it's easy. I completely disagree with that. Change, particularly a deep pattern, is one of the hardest things that you can do. So yeah, a lot to say on that.
I love that. Now, I know I could speak to you forever and a day, and we are short on time because we've gone over, but where can people find you if they would like to know more, like to work with you, like to listen to your podcast and dive into everything?
Yeah, so mainly the podcast, which is the Motherkind podcast, and that's on all major podcast platforms. You can just pop it into Google, and whatever you listen on, it will be there. The website is motherkind.co, and we do like power coaching sessions where you can work with me for 90 minutes. And that's where I've got the most availability. I do work longer term with people, 6 to 12 months, but that's always quite full. So yeah, it's those shorter sessions, and I've got a coaching team as well, so you can work with people who I've trained and who coach alongside me. So there's options. There's lots of options there, and that's all on the website, motherkind.co.
Brilliant. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat to me. You're honestly a breath of fresh air. You're so fascinating. I love what you're doing and achieving and just going for it, whilst also being present, as you said, with your daughters. I think you're just absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for advocating for yourself and for how you want to live your life and grow your business and be a mother. Please definitely go and check out the Motherkind podcast. It is phenomenal, and I feel like I learn something new every time I listen to it. So thank you everyone again so much for listening, and I will see you again on the next episode. Bye bye for now.